Welcome back to Founding Up's Uncharted Your Sidekick for Life, your go-to podcast for navigating the unpredictable journey of life, entrepreneurship, and innovation. This is Season 2, Episode 3, and we're thrilled to have Luke Goetting with us today. We're diving deep into the world of Gen Z and entrepreneurship with a special guest who's been blazing trails in this space. Special thanks to our Gen Z contributor, Sarah, who defines what success is to her and also discusses the need for detachment from addictive things like our phones. Whether you're a seasoned founder or just starting out, this episode is packed with insights that will resonate with anyone passionate about making a difference. So buckle up and let's get started.
Welcome to Founding Up, Uncharted Your Sidekick for Life. We are now Season 2, Episode 3. Yeah.
Love it.
I'm enjoying that enthusiasm, so I'm here for it.
That's 15 episodes in for those that are keeping track.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's so cool.
So many great
We
conversations.
actually had to count. You all missed it. We had to take it. We're like, which episode are we on?
That's why it's delayed recording. We
Right.
just really need to work out that math.
Let's do the math. Rocket scientist, please help us out.
I'm not a podcast scientist, Dan.
Yeah, numbers guy. You speak two languages.
The machine does the addition. I don't.
True.
Pi is 3 if I'm doing it in my head, man.
Today we have our special guest mentor in the house, Luke Goetting.
Nailed it.
Boom.
I'm glad to know that's how you pronounce it. I was
We
wondering.
asked him.
Okay.
You had to tell her the secret. I was like, you didn't know that?
Yeah, obviously.
German name, lots of vowels thrown in,
Got it.
strike one or two and you'll get it.
Sure.
You get it down.
But for those that are just joining us, let's talk about the rest of the people in the room.
Hi, everybody. I'm Natalie Peyton. I'm an actor, comedian, and podcast personality.
Dang, she's got
Nailed
that
that.
down.
Yeah, I got
Nailed
that.
You know, it only took like 12 tries.
To 15.
Take 15. And hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Leon Vanstone, rocket scientist, storyteller, and entrepreneur.
Co-founder of Founding Up and all the other kind of stuff. Just passionate about Gen Z, passionate about mentorship.
Amen.
I'm just helping you out there. And your host, Dan Dillard, also co-founder of Founding Up and entrepreneur of many other things and passionate about mentorship, especially for Gen Z, but mentorship in general. It opens the world. And so that's what we're going to talk about, opening the world.
Perfect.
And Luke, we met, a month ago?
Sounds right.
Through Tim, who was on our last podcast. So if you guys haven't caught the last one, go check out Tim. That was a great story. I loved how he talked about he's the startup guy. He's a startup 0 to 1. I really love that. But Tim, in our coffee meeting, said, you got to meet Luke, because Luke really focuses on Gen Z and has conversations with businesses and companies all about workforce. And so I thought, right in alignment with everything that we're doing. So why don't I let you kind of start with what you're doing now, and then let's go back to, is it what you thought you were going to do when you were in high school?
Work our way back, right?
Yeah.
I own a creative agency here in Austin that's been over 10 years now, so it's been
nice.
a really fun journey.
Yeah.
It's called Puffingston Presentations, which coincidentally enough was named for my baby sister, who is a Gen Z. Her family nickname was always Puff growing up.
I love that.
So a lot of amazing experiences working with young professionals, onboarding, recruiting, training them through that capacity. And then for the last, we'll say 9 months or so, I have actually been speaking professionally about Gen Z in the workforce.
Okay.
And actually just got back from Australia on Monday.
Oh, damn.
Doing some talks there. So if anything, that's my fail safe here. If anything I'm saying is loopy, I'm still trying to figure out where I am.
I'm just jet lagged. Right?
Yeah, for
Then
sure.
off to Nashville tomorrow, and I've got 3 talks in the next 5 days. But the whole concept is engagement unleashed, unlocking the potential of Gen Z employees. Mm-hmm. And so I felt, for whatever reason, that I needed to come to the defense of Gen Z.
Sure.
As a millennial, I saw I was really growing frustrated over the last 3 to 5 years, especially during the start of the pandemic. All these articles kept coming out. Gen Z's lazy, they're entitled, they don't want to work.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it just felt like, one, these were all just rehashing of everything that had just been published about
the
millennials.
millennials.
Exactly. It's like, we just literally
Copy
Reset.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. And then what I was really frustrated, just looking a one layer deeper, is so many of these articles featured a quote from a manager and a quote from a CEO. But funny, a lot of times the perspective of Gen Z was just totally omitted.
Right.
And I knew from my experience and talking with clients and looking at all the chaos in the industry, especially at the start of the pandemic, we were just scrambling to figure out how to even use Zoom. And then I knew surely there's a lot of things to be desired in terms of onboarding and training. And that narrative just didn't seem like it was being captured to me. So I felt like I needed to get out there and just let's start let's just build some positivity. Let's talk about this idea that different doesn't necessarily equal bad. Let's just figure out how can we foster these intergenerational collaborations. So that's the theme. Obviously, we can dive deeper, but those are the two things I'm really working on.
Nice.
That's so interesting.
So aligned with what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I found the right podcast. I think we're in the right room.
The thing that really interested me, well, before we go there, why don't we talk about before 10 years ago when you started Creative Agency, like what was the path and what was that like?
How'd you
And
get
that
it?
was
How'd
your
you get it?
journey. Did you know you wanted to do that in high school? Did you know you wanted to do that when you were 10? Like, what does that look like?
So I call it a coincidence because I didn't actually set out to be entrepreneurial, but coincidentally, I majored in entrepreneurship in college. Yeah, so it seems disingenuous, but it honestly wasn't. I knew I wanted to do business. That was just the broad strokes, something I was interested in. Coming out of high school, I was less focused on necessarily what I was going to do and more about the size of the school I was looking for.
Why? Why the size?
I just coming from I went through to a very small K through 8 school, so we were 30 to 40-ish kids pretty much throughout that entire
You're like, I just want more.
Yeah, you know everyone. And then high school was about, 1,000 or so bigger school.
Yeah.
But when I was visiting colleges, I found that the enormous universities, I just felt very intimidated by those prospects. But I also wanted something slightly bigger than high school. So I ended up going to the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota.
Okay.
Which is about like 5,000 undergrads.
You said St. Thomas. I'm like, ooh.
Yeah, there's another one in Texas here.
Well, I was thinking about St. Thomas like an island. I'm like, there's a university in an island?
Oh, yeah, that would have been even better. I think the winters we had in St. Paul, Minnesota were a little rougher than the island,
exactly.
island life. But yeah, it ended up being a perfect fit in terms of the size I was looking for, and kind of went from there.
But in college, you were already, so you ended up deciding entrepreneurship, and then from there, like,
that just because it sounded good, or like what?
I really wanted to me, it felt the most well-rounded of the business degrees. I didn't want to look specifically at accounting. I didn't want to look specifically at marketing. And so I felt like, well, entrepreneurship, they'll teach you a bit of everything.
Okay.
And to me, that was really the main reason not to get specialized too early.
And then how'd you go from there to create the specific business in the creative? Like,
yeah, so my first job out of school was in outside sales, and I was lucky enough to start that with an internship while I was still in school. And I say lucky because I graduated in 2010, meaning we were still in the main thrust of the Great Recession.
Mm-hmm.
And so many of my friends were either continuing to school or having to move back home. And I really didn't want to do either of those things and really wanted to find something. So I was lucky enough to catch on with this company that was in electronic security. So we're talking like they were a manufacturer of alarm systems, camera systems, and they were a small business, and they had never had a dedicated rep in the Midwest. And so I was lucky enough pretty early on in my career to be basically thrown out into the world. And I had at one point, I think I had 12 or 13 states, from as far east as Pittsburgh, exotic places like Omaha, everywhere in between in the Midwest. But I was thrown out there to go visit with our local installer networks and do trainings with them and do just kind of update them on our products and such.
Mhm.
So in many ways, it felt entrepreneurial because I was really building that
Territory.
network
Yeah.
and territory for the first time and learning a ton as I went. And so that was that was a really great experience. And we can kind of talk more about that transition. But one of the things I really found it shocked me at first was that the humble PowerPoint ended up being like the top asset in my career because I was going out and presenting on a daily basis.
Right.
And like most small businesses, we just kind of had this thing that was cobbled together by the president of our company, and it was fine, but nothing real exciting.
Right.
And I started getting really interested in meeting dynamics and in interactivity, specifically because I found, especially as someone just starting out, my instinct was just to kind of, put the PowerPoint up, just talk through it, just do the safest thing, not really interact with anyone, because I was brand new to the industry, speaking to people who had decades and decades of experience.
Like stay in the safe zone.
Yeah, exactly.
Stick to the script.
That's exactly right. Like, I didn't even know some of the biggest players in the industry, some of all the keywords and phrases. So I would just do that. But I eventually realized I'm not taking anything away from these meetings. Like I'll go to this place in Omaha and present to them for 60 minutes and then just leave. And I never even had a conversation with anyone. I have no idea if anything I said
good,
was
bad. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got to bring this all home. I got really interested in meeting dynamics, presentation dynamics, and ended up freelancing, and eventually quitting my job and freelancing. And then that sort of snowballed into a creative agency over the years.
All about the personal experience and how do you make that better?
Yes, and I think we have as much room to make progress on that front as ever before, especially as it relates to our audiences are increasingly becoming Gen Z and millennials. I think the stat is by next year, already 2/3 of the workforce will be just those two demographics. And so we'll probably talk about the concept digital native quite a bit today. And I think this idea of experiences like presentations, or we were talking, Leon, about lectures, like those are going to have to evolve because entertainment and digital consumption is so entirely removed from this very one-way, stodgy keynote style experience.
For the purposes of the audience, because we were having that discussion before cameras started rolling, you were talking about lecture and being a lecturer yourself about I'll let you speak about.
Yeah, so I mean, we to catch the audience up, we were talking, or to recap this story, right? We had been talking to Gen Z, similar to your thing, right? We started founding up. Me and Dan were like, this is a good idea, and then we were like, we should probably talk to some Gen Z first, right? So we go out, we're talking to this one Gen Z guy, and he had a very familiar story to a lot of people you encounter in Gen Z and outside of it too. He'd gone to university for a year or two. Didn't really see the point, wasn't really getting anything out of it, really struggled to learn anything from lectures. His grades weren't great, and he left, right? And now, he was struggling to figure out what he wanted to do next, wasn't working great jobs, and had a year or two's worth of university debt that he had to do something about. And, he was just kind of beating up on himself. He's like, I don't know, we were talking, I just didn't get it. I just must not be that bright. I just couldn't learn anything in the lectures. And I said to him, we know you don't learn. We know this. There's endless studies on it, right? The reason we lecture people in university is because of the business model. It only works if there's one of me and 100 of you, and I can stand there and lecture you on it. There are endless studies that show at best 1 out of 4 people in that room is learning anything, not thriving, learning anything.
And when you say we, just for clarification, we as a university.
We as universities, we as academics, we as a society know damn well that no one, and I knew personally, I was a lecturer, I could see him asleep. I'm not even joking. Like, I would try to make it as interesting as possible, but like, look, you've put so many time demands as well. Anyway, so yeah, it was like, we know it's not an engaging medium. We know it's boring. It's just I need 100 of you to support my salary. That's the whole business model, man. And it's dumb. And like, eventually it's come full circle. Now we're founding up where I'm like, I do want to see that change because I don't think that's the way forward. but there are just so many people that show up to these, like they show up, they're bored, they're tired, they're not learning anything, and they think it's because they're stupid. And you're like, no, it's because it's boring. Like, this isn't engaging. And Gen Z have lived their entire lives, especially with social media, which is hard-coded to be one of the single most engaging things. Like, billions of dollars to get spent to make sure that TikTok is as engaging as humanly possible. And then, yeah, you're like, wait, hang on, this is really boring. Like,
It's and I'll just grab that thread and say, coming from university, coming from college, I thought surely when I get to the corporate world, I'm going to see the presentation quality just go shoot through the roof, and like
it's
these
a
much more
meritocracy,
dynamic.
the CEO must be the best guy.
Yeah. And I was blown away that it was as amateurish as
If
at
not
school,
worse.
if not worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I figured, well, I work for a small business, so surely when I go to these big industry conferences and I see the big guys talk,
no.
and those were worse slides and text everywhere. I was so baffled by that. And so
We were asked to do a podcast for a company, a corporate company, and God, that is so lame. And I'm in the meetings that this is the creative, this is what they're going to put together for this entire billion-dollar organization, and this is their annual meeting, and I'm like, this is what you're going to put out.
I always liked it, when the AI was earlier, right? And everyone was kind of freaking out, and no one really understood what the job market disruption was going to be. And there was that tagline that every CEO was using. That's like, don't worry, you won't be replaced by a person. You won't be replaced by an AI. You'll be replaced by a person who knows how to use AI. And I'm like, sure I will, Steve, because you don't know how to send your own emails, right? You're going to have to hire someone that understands it, because you don't know, you don't understand any of this, right? Like, and that does frustrate me a little, like, as you say, as a millennial who read millennials are lazy, and as a digital native, someone who grew up with the internet, it did frustrate me when all these people would come and like, you have no idea what you're calling a generation lazy that has every single skill that you need, right? That you're desperate to get them in, to get into their markets, to get them in to do TikTok. Like, I hate Gen Z, they're lazy. Oh, but hey, can you come do TikTok for me? Like,
one of the things that we were having a conversation the other day with someone we were talking to in business, and he was asking us about more content, and I said, the future is not more content,
right?
And so I think that was part of that mentality. The mentality of like, let's just create more of it. Let's just it's okay to be boring. Let's just create more of it. I'm like, we got enough content.
How about good content?
Let's
start with that.
How about we learn how to make good questions and let the AI spit out the content and make sure that happens. But one of the things that you and I were talking about in our first call, which I thought was a fascinating statistic, and I hadn't really thought about this, maybe not a stat, but I guess what a fact is, that for the first time we've got 4 generations in the workforce.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Is it maybe 5 or what do we got?
Time to retire, baby boomers.
We got Z, millennials, X, boomers, and then silent generation still I think is 1 to 2%.
Okay.
Our president right now, silent generation.
He's in the workforce.
So yeah, at least 5 generations. And so we have these 2 really interesting trends happening right now where, as I just mentioned, the majority of the workforce is now digital native. However, much of leadership is still entered the workforce 40, 60, 80 years prior to
some
Gen
of them
Z
before television
entering
was
the
real.
workforce, right? And I would argue they inherited business norms from the Great Depression and Industrial Revolution practically. So we have this huge stretching and all these different norms that to your point haven't necessarily evolved. And to me, bringing it all back to this kind of dynamic in meetings, I've really tried to start incorporating principles from social media and from entertainment, where I try never to go more than 10 minutes, 15 minutes without an audience participation moment. I use a tool called Slido, which is an audience participation tool, and people can literally use their phones to weigh in on polls and word clouds and
Oh, I used to
Like
do that.
Jackbox.
I used to like doing that during lectures. Yeah,
Yeah.
generate little word clouds and
Exactly.
things.
It's like rather than fighting against
Right.
what we know is inevitable, like people being on their phone, probably because it's boring,
Right.
like involve them in a process,
Right.
have user contributed content, which again is one of the core tenets of social media.
Mhm.
And let's try to make this an interactive two-way experience to the extent that I literally have sections of my talks where I have different content pieces. It's kind of like a Netflix style menu,
Mm-hmm.
and my audience literally votes what they're most interested in. And I
let's
have a
go there.
modular presentation. I
Yeah.
click on it, and we go off in the direction of
Do
whatever
you-
my audience chose.
Do you ever just spend an hour or two trying to figure out what you want to watch? Or is that just me?
No,
Oh, for
it's not just you.
on content.
Yeah.
Netflix, yeah.
I'm a huge Rotten Tomatoes
Oh, yeah,
advocate,
if it-
so like I have to screen everything through like an Excel sheet of what the ratings were, cross-referencing.
That's funny.
Uh,
I just ask my friends in my community. But I'm so glad to hear about this and the way meetings and presentations should change to involve the audience, so to speak. I was just with my dad last night, and he's about to start teaching at University of Texas, and he was going through his whole class, and it was so interactive, and it's intro to music business, so it's fun and exciting and different. But what he's doing differently, which maybe isn't so different, but he has these brief little presentations, but then brings in a guest speaker like a musician or a famous manager or a
Yeah.
sync licensing person.
Yeah.
But it's interactive, and then the audience participates, or the students participate through polls or through fun little projects within the class. So
That keeps it interesting.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he's got to watch out. And I'm not saying that UT will do this, but we were talking to someone that
Oh,
was
yeah, they
like-
got fired.
Oh, wow.
because he didn't have enough of his own lecture time. Like he was bringing in all these guests, and the class was like everybody loved it. And then for whatever reason,
Well, so the problem you have is that some lecturers like, guest lectures, and then they'll guest lecture everything. It'll be a train wreck, but then that way they don't have any teaching commitments.
oh no,
So the- and-
there's
So the university's
Yeah.
got wise to this, and they said you must teach at least X amount of your course,
Right.
40%, whatever. But the irony, right, is here this guy was bringing in these really good guest lectures. It's not like he wasn't in the room,
Right.
but then they fired him because
but it's again going back to the core of the idea is like that's actually good learning at that point. And they're like, we're
Yeah.
getting rid of that.
I'd be curious to look at, is
What's
this
that?
norms versus the actual results, because you'd think that
the
their
students were
learning was
happy.
better,
Yeah.
Exactly. And learning
and
better.
probably the final metrics bared that out.
I'm glad you pointed that out as far as the age in the workforce and the backgrounds, because that's what we see bringing it out to just universities and general institutions, right? When something becomes institutionalized, we've gotten so big that these are the structures in place, these are the SOPs, this is the way we do things, and it's just then it becomes the society of this institution, but institutions don't move as fast as I look at institutions like a big oil tanker. They don't move as fast as a speedboat. And when you have generations coming in doing all these things, and then you got this big institution that just moves so ever so slowly, so that becomes that then becomes a pain point. And it's not only a pain point for Gen Z, their parents. It's a pain point for employers, because employers need to move at the speed of these speedboats. Because like you got AI, we've got to adapt as an employer. You're like, we've got to make these adaptations, we've got to make it quick. And then you're asking for this kind of training to come out. You expect as an employer to, like, when you hire someone with a degree, that they're going to have all of this training, and that's not the case.
Right.
And so a lot of times there's this frustration because there's this retraining that has to happen. There's like, I've got to now become have a training program within the company that kind of finishes out that education.
Mhm.
So it just becomes an entire different thing. So
Yeah, we were earlier talking about amount of content versus quality of content, etc. One thing that jumps out to me is this is a generation, this digital native generation, Gen Z, is extremely used to being autonomous because they've since they could steal their parents' iPad at age 3,
right.
have been able to access the internet and search for answers or post something And within minutes, if not, maybe an hour or so, they're going to have tons of responses.
Right.
And so, not that that's not an important conversation about quality versus quantity,
Right.
but I would argue the most important thing at an organizational level now is facilitating autonomy, as in having systems where this information can be accessed.
Mhm.
Because I feel like so many times we've got like some 10-year-old PDF document sitting somewhere, and we don't even know. It takes a year to even know where these shared drive folders are.
Right.
And so by that time, we've already learned everything. But they're having internal systems where we can essentially create kind of an in-house Google
Mhm.
for these employees to be able to find this content on their own, especially technical stuff where like who wants to go find their manager and be like, can you hover over my shoulder and walk me through this onboarding tool?
Right.
As opposed to being able to just look at a guide of information.
Yeah.
So I would argue in terms of really playing to Gen Z and millennial strengths is let's create systems that are much more analogous to that
Yeah.
digital experience.
Yeah, and that's coming. AI is going to be a big help with that because now you can just ask the AI where's that, and it'll go find it for you.
Right.
So that's really cool. What have you found in your now speaking career and talking to businesses and the number of people you've talked to? What have you found? What are some of the things that you've learned and picked up from the generations and the businesses and the feedback?
Yeah. I find that it's been a really fun exploration on diving deeper on turnover and then the frustrations around that. Obviously, a lot of people are still pretty scarred from this great resignation period. It's fallen off a bit, but for the preceding 1, 2, 3 years, that was a voluntary turnover rates were as high as they've ever been. And diving a little deeper in discussions with managers and leaders and even Gen Z employees themselves, one of the things I found is there's a significant disconnect between sort of showing the vision of what one can achieve at an organization.
Mm-hmm.
I have found that I had an interview on my podcast with my cousin, and he was 27, 28. He'd had at the time, 3-4 year career. And the way he talked about it, you would think he had been working for decades. Like you could tell he was analyzing, what am I learning? What are the opportunities? What's the opportunity cost of staying here on like a quarterly basis?
Right.
And I feel like that's that pace, that's that digital nativity that Gen Z really analyzes things at. And so what I found was, what I have been finding is a lot of companies, they have a vision for what, you get hired and then you get trained up and then maybe you're going to get promoted. Like they have a vision for that path, but they oftentimes do a very poor job of sharing that vision and collaboratively outlining it with their employees.
Right.
And so my most common refrain is, they had a very common thing I'll be told is they left after just a year or 2 years. They had so much more to learn. And then my first question is, did you share that with them? Did you show that roadmap? Did you indicate, what is, if you stay here, if you keep putting in the work, here are the skills we can work on together. Here's where the outcomes are going to be. Because I find most companies do a poor job of sharing that.
Right.
And of course, that's a big part of the buy-in for not thinking that, hey, I've plateaued here, I've learned everything I can, time to move on.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. My background's in finance, and so we study generations from a workforce and wealth perspective. One of the things that is interesting is you go back and a few generations or even 20 years ago, and people had maybe 3 to 4 jobs during their lifetime. There was a time and a mindset when you had pensions. Companies came with a pension and they took care of you in retirement. That created a lot of loyalty. That created this long-term mindset of like, I'm just going to do my thing. I'm going to continue working and I'll make it, climb up the ladder. And at some point I'm going to retire and I'm going to have this pension for the rest of my life. Then globalization happened and companies had to get more competitive. So they went from, we're pulling the pension away and giving you a 401k. It's on your own. And so we're not responsible for this. That shifted the mentality like, well, then it's every man for themselves. If you're not going to take care of me during my retirement and I've got to do it myself, I'm going to continue to climb the ladder, but in different companies. And so that went from, 3 to 4 times during your life that you changed jobs, and it was like 2 at one point, to like 12. Like now it's like a person changes jobs every 3 or 4 years, so it's like 12 times during their lifetime.
And that's an average too, right? So that includes some of the, talking about the 5 generations, that includes a bunch of people who have only ever had 2 different jobs, right?
Yeah.
All the way down to Gen Z who've had like 12 and they're 28.
The stat I most recently saw was that Gen Z is expected to have 17 different jobs over 5 different careers. Pretty
in the first
pretty
year of
amazing.
their life.
Yeah, probably so.
So that, just if you kind of put that into the context of what Gen Z is looking out for themselves, they're trying to figure it out, and that along with now AI is coming out and it's replacing so many jobs, and I've got to reskill, I've got all these things, it does make that speed up. So what you're saying that resonates is that if you don't, as an employer, if you're not communicating and showing that path, that roadmap, there's no reason to stay. I mean, they're going to get what they learned, and then at the first pain point, and the first opportunity, not even a pain point, they're going to be okay at their current job, but there's another opportunity that I'm unable to do this, and I'm going to jump. And so it's important to have that why and roadmap and show and show that. So,
and I'll be the first to defend Gen Z and to stress this to employers that there is a very clear economic case that you should be leaving your role.
Right. That's how you want a pay rise?
Yep. During the Great Resignation, the stats were generally 15 to 20% on average. People were getting raises at that point for switching jobs, and of course, promotions oftentimes coming with that. Gen Z being very interconnected via social media, they can see their colleagues.
Right.
They can see other people say, "Hey, I change jobs every 2 years, and boom, watch my salary just skyrocket." As opposed to, I've stayed here, and I have to beg and make my case for a cost of living increase.
Yeah.
And so, employers, I think it's very rational, and I'll defend Gen Z on that point. But employers need to realize that's what we're competing against, and we need to really stress the opportunities here. And it's not just financial, of course, but like what can you achieve by staying here? Because you're probably going to learn a lot if you switch jobs and go somewhere new.
I also just kind of, and I'm making a generalization just of what we've learned through our customer discovery, but Gen Z has a lot more why to their existence. It's not what often you painted or looked at what a boomer did. So especially from a finance standpoint, there's like a set path to get the house and do the things and put the kids to school, and there's just like this common path. And it was like, I'll do whatever it takes. Even if I don't love the job, but I'm going to do these things to get this. Where having a 21-year-old and having these conversations all the time with her and her friends, the passion of a Gen Z wants a more fulfilling career and wants to make sure that they're spending their time on something that matters. There's a lot more emphasis in that from a very young age, which I think is so mature.
It's amazing. I was talking to the CEO of Captain Planet, a nonprofit out of Georgia. Yes. Earth, fire, water, we're wind. Yeah. It is the
millennial
same guy,
cartoons for those Gen Z listening.
Close to Gen
It might
X,
be X, yeah. But it's the same guy, and they have the licensing, and it came from the TV show. But she was telling me that Gen Z are largely responsible for creating the DEI goals, the diversity, equity, inclusion goals of organizations, as well as ESG goals and biosocial governance. And that is so remarkable because they're so young and they care so much about community and all contributing to society, whereas other generations can be more nuclear and only focusing on themselves. But Gen Z really does care about everybody and everything, and supporting and defending, you use that word, defending other cultures or groups of people.
Exactly. Yeah, in the U.S., it is the most diverse generation to date, and that is a major priority of theirs. And they, one thing I really admire about them is being digital natives. They're pretty good at sussing out this authenticity. You think about Instagram and sort of those fake lives that were often being portrayed. And they call it out so often at organizations. They got all these DEI initiatives and posters. And then you see the org chart and you start to look at those upper rungs. Wow, that doesn't look so diverse. That doesn't look like we've got a lot of gender, different racial representations there. And they will call that out.
Hold the organization feet to the fire.
Yeah, yep, exactly. I think, again, one thing, maybe a kind of bigger, broader categorization is just looking at life holistically versus I think some of the older generations did have more of you've got your work persona and you've got your life persona, and those don't intermix a ton.
Right.
Like once you clock out, you go home,
but
then you've got a different vibe.
In fairness on that one, right? I feel that it was almost forced. They didn't have a choice, right? Because when that generation got to work a 9 to 5, who gets to do 9 to 5 anymore, right? Like, no. You don't do overtime. You just work extra or I fire you. I mean, that's the reality of being Gen Z, right? You don't get a pension. You don't just go to like, before you could get a job, you understood that job would provide for you. They were going to look after you. We took all of that away, right? When by the time Gen Z was showing up to the workforce, there was no guarantee that you could retire. There was no guarantee that going to university would get you a good job. There was no guarantee that your employer would look after you. There was none of these guarantees. We took all of them away. And you were like, yeah, work for me and I'll pay you. And I'll fire you when it doesn't suit me anymore, right? Which could be tomorrow, by the way, YOLO. Also, I need you to stay late tonight, right? And so we kind of forced them to find their own meaning because the job wasn't going to give them any. The workplace wasn't going to give them any. The universities aren't necessarily giving them any. We were like, here's an iPhone, figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And they did, right? Like no other generation has ever done. Savviest group of people I've ever met. Like you said, they're always watching, they're always thinking, and they know what's going on in the world around them.
And very legitimate concerns about what summer we're here in Austin, Texas. What's summer going to look like in 20 years, let alone 60 years, let alone 100 years from now? Will we have any water in Central Texas?
By the way, yesterday I just got a text. Abilene, just down up the street, 113 yesterday. They made the national news for the hottest place in the U.S.
Yeah.
Why did I come back? Literally yesterday, I was in New York and it was 50 degrees in upstate New York. It was absolutely stunning.
Because you wanted to be at the podcast.
Started being
That's
crispy.
why you came back.
Telling you.
Yes, exactly.
I'll make my plug for Australia. It's
exactly. It's winter.
It's winter time right now.
Winter.
So yeah, we're talking.
You've heard of
I don't know all my
snowball.
Celsius, but it was definitely 60s there, which was pretty great. Now,
What is that?
same concerns over there with their country on fire during the summer months. Oftentimes, yeah.
No ozone layer and
Let's jump into some of these questions so that this conversation has been great, and I want to continue.
At least one. We have to do at least one.
one
question.
clip.
At least. All right. So we've got Sarah here. Let's see what she's talking about.
Success for me is whatever I see as the most important, which, for me is being self-sufficient. Success to me would be doing what I love, making good money while doing it, but also doing something important for other people.
Bingo. It's like we set this up.
Mm-hmm.
I promise I didn't set up that after that conversation we just had, but
You can stop paying people to say the things you want, all right? It's getting weird.
go get this done.
Yeah.
That was so to the point that we were just talking about. There are these things which, if you asked someone what success meant 30 years ago, it wouldn't have been as detailed as that. It would have been like, I want to make enough money, I want to have a house, I want to put my kids through school, that kind of stuff. That's where the focus was. I know I've listened to a lot of that during my financial planning career, but this was a lot more detailed. Doing what I love is a big part of what she considers success, and then important to other people, like helping other people. So like that is like a measurement of success, which is, I just think, is awesome.
Yeah. I can't stress enough, purpose is very much a differentiator now at an organizational level. And I think a lot of times our instincts go to, well, if we're not a green energy company, like how do we, just as an everyday organization, stress our, values and how we're making the world a better place? But I think that answers its own question a little bit, in that so often I feel getting back to my world of presentations, we have these rah kickoff meetings at the start of the year, and that's when we talk about our values and our purpose. And then, now it's August and it's 108 outside, and like we're on the 17th edition of this project of this nightmarish client. Purpose has kind of been forgotten at that point. So I really feel companies need to do a much better job of stressing what is the point. I'll use my own creative agency as an example. I often, as the leader of the company, have these really intimate conversations with our clients about, like, this is a really high stakes presentation. This is the big industry event. This is a major opportunity for our executive team to present and share our vision for the future. But if I don't do a good job of communicating that to my team, it's just another project with another annoying timeline, another annoying amount of revisions that we have to complete, and an impractical amount of opportunity to do so. And that's a totally different framework. So values. And then I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention that Gen Z is the most entrepreneurial generation to date. And so if they do need to just get that check the box paycheck to make a living, they can still look at those so-called side hustles to find that purpose and to be able to help people and pursue their passions. And so I think that's so just inspiring. Again, a generation that constantly gets knocked as lazy,
Right.
also has the most. I've heard stats as high as 70% of Gen Z have a side hustle that they're earning extra income from.
Right.
So how cool that they're really pursuing that in all facets of their lives.
I love that. I was looking up, pull up my phone because there's a book I'm listening to. We've got one of the companies I'm working with, a financial planning company. I still mentor that and advise on that. We do a book reading or a book club every 2 weeks. And so what we're studying right now is called Excellence Wins. I'm not sure if you've listened to that book before or read that book. It's about how Ritz-Carlton got its start. And one of the things that reminded me of is they had, I think it was 24 values that they would go over, and every one of the employees had it in the back pocket, like they had these cards printed up. And not only that, every shift would go through them before they started the shift. And so it was like, talk about not beginning of the year, it's like every single shift they'd like remind themselves of why they're doing what they're doing, and that's creating that excellence environment to serve. And so this really great servant leadership that comes out of that Ritz-Carlton experience, and that creates the brand that we all know. And it's like, you hear those words and you automatically think excellence. And so, I think that's incredibly important. But if you haven't heard that, check it out. It's really cool. That's what I've got out of it so far. All right, let's jump into the second one. Let's see what is this Sarah again. And
Sarah's out there dropping some
she is.
bombs.
Seriously.
I don't like to use the word like addicted for things that are just like my phone, but I am on it constantly just to get the little scrolling reassurance, and I hate it. And I'm trying to just detach from that so that I can feel grounded and like at peace with like myself and the world directly around me.
We talk about this all the time. It's this addiction to phone. And
more money has been put in to make your phone addictive than has been put towards certain drugs to make them addictive. Like, there is more money in making that phone addictive than there is in drugs. Like, hands down.
I don't have the exact data on this, but I remember hearing there was a significant drop in engagement and parents just put their kids' phones on black and white, like night mode.
Oh yeah,
versus the color because of all the stimulation. And that's just scratching the surface, right? But everything is designed to create that.
I have a
engagement.
I have a 2-year-old. Right, it's super fun in parenting him in every interpretation of that. But so he's really inquisitive and he runs around. He puts books on. He's like, you can see him like, you turn a screen on, he just goes, he just like and he just zones in and he stops pulling at everything. And it's from apparently it's like, you're trying to get dinner done. He's trying to grab knives. Oh my God, he's asking everything. Like, it's so tempting to just give him a phone, give him a screen. But man, you just see him. And one day it occurred to me, I was like, oh, I do that too. If that does that to him, it must also do it to me. And
Right.
I'm like, I have to get off of this thing, and you
Yeah.
can't,
Yeah.
right? Like it's like you're like, oh hey, by the way, I need you, but as a requirement of your job, you need to shoot up heroin 3 times a day, but don't get addicted.
Right.
You're like, well, how does that supposed to work? Like,
Yeah.
Those Gen Alpha iPad babies, right?
whoa, it's terrifying. It's terrifying.
That's why I'm so concerned that kids have lost the ability to imagine. Like you sort of just described it really well. He's inquisitive and trying to find out new things when the screen is off. And then when it turns on, he just goes in.
We did talk about this book, Deep Work, that we read. I brought up a few months ago, but he talks about this. He talks about there's this layer that we can stay in that is not imagination. It's not deep. And some of these writers that have to go off and just turn everything off and then just dive for a week at a time and come out with like this wonderful work of art.
Right.
It's because the muscle of the brain is like any other muscle. You've got to exercise it, and that requires the things that immediately rob you or keep you in the shallow part, the shallow thinking. Shallow thinking is good for a certain amount of things throughout the day, but you're not exercising all that deep work or the deep brain. Of course, the book says it a lot better than I do. I'm just kind of paraphrasing, but we get the point.
You got a lot of book recommendations today.
I tell you what,
Gotta get your reading lists going.
I tell you
We're
what,
not going outside right now, anyway. So,
all right, we're gonna actually get 3 in today. And
can I just really quickly on the social media? Okay,
go ahead.
I feel like the negatives are extremely thoroughly discussed about this. I mean, even obviously addiction has a very negative connotation,
Right?
From the stats I've seen, it's generally pretty evenly split among Gen Z about how they perceive. Half see it as a negative, half see it as a positive. And I just really want to stress how cool I think Gen Z leveraging social media for how do I negotiate a raise, or how do I study for an industry exam, or all these things that they use professionally. You can get on TikTok and just search for something kind of relatively like a PMP certification in project management. Like you'll have someone kind of walking through how they went through that process. Like incredible. And you find it within seconds as opposed to digging through some industry site.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I just do want to make the case that it's been really cool to see them leverage that for their careers.
Right.
And again, I think companies can do this. Like the day in the life videos get so much engagement. Compare that to a job description. This is what our like so boring.
Right.
Who's gonna read through? Speaking of, not just go negative on the books, but like 1, 2, 3 pages of job description, a 45-second video clip where someone's going and interacting around the office. Like so much more powerful.
Yeah. No, there is a lot, and I agree with you. I think there's so much that speaks about the negative because there is, but there's also, you've got to look at that. What can you pull out of that? What positive is? And I think that it comes down to balance. It comes out each individual like figuring out. And we've had several suggestions even on the show, but as far as maybe like going on a diet for social media, so you have like an hour at the evening that you do versus like all day having it, because it can rob your time if you're not intentional. So I think intention is something that can be spoken about when it comes to this tool. It can be a tool or it can be a time waster. So,
and we talked earlier about kind of organizations continuing the education process. One thing that I think just makes so much sense, huge advocate for it. A lot of orgs have started to just do soft skills trainings. And because we talked earlier about having this huge generational spread of people entering the workforce, 20 to 80 years differences. That means there's going to be a lot of different norms and expectations.
Right.
And that can lead, if not directly addressed, to this kind of passive aggressive behavior.
Yeah,
right?
right.
It should have been like that. Yeah. Why are you wearing that? Why are you 3 minutes late? I'm a huge advocate for just like, let's get everyone on the same page. Let's at least set those expectations. And maybe no one's been told like that they shouldn't have their phone out during a meeting. Let's just kind of get everyone on and talking about that first, and then we can build from there.
No,
that makes a lot of sense.
100%. I love where you're coming from, because a lot of problems that I've seen in business is always communication. It's always empathy, trying to figure out why isn't, and I've just kind of looked at this from a standpoint of, normally we attack something, we always assume, or at least I do, or I did,
You're
that
making assumptions about me there, Dan.
exactly is that this person thinks like I do because we get along, right? But we fail to understand that this person has an entire different world in their head than I do. Different upbringing, different parents, different everything is different. So their perspectives, the way they look at things, and we might be looking at the elephant, but they're looking at the tail, I'm looking at the trunk, right? And so we always fail to think about it. At least it's just not common to think about it that way. But what happens when you do that is then expectations. Because this person thinks like I do, I expect him to behave or think a certain way. And then the problem with expectations is you let yourself down, because you're putting expectations of that person that you would expect on yourself. And then you're just disappointed. Like, why didn't you do it this way? Like, but there was no communication. There was no empathy in the whole process. So what you're saying is spot on. So more communication, more empathy towards the differences that make this world go round and round.
Right.
It's awesome.
And those differences are strengths, right? I mean,
Yes.
Diversity, the whole point in diversity is to bring people that have different experiences and expectations of the world to the same place to solve a problem, right? So across all of those people, you can come up with the very best ideas you can figure out, and you can bring the best of those ideas collaboratively to a thing. But what gets missed, perhaps again, going back to Gen Z being one of the most diverse generations, which is a good thing, right? Is in that diversity, then to your point exactly, it gets harder, because there aren't these shared experiences, there aren't these shared assumptions. We're not all on the same page, and that's a good thing. That's a strength. But then communication actually got harder, not easier. On top of the fact that communication is just hard. Ask anyone in a relationship. Ask anyone that knows anyone, which is everyone, hopefully, right? Like, communication is really hard, really, really, really hard. And as you do good things, and as you bring more purpose and more worldviews and everything to the same table and say, okay, how do we figure this out? It only gets harder.
Absolutely. Yeah, trying to facilitate that spirit of intergenerational and learning from one another, I think is a top challenge / opportunity at an organizational level. I'm reminded again of my cousin Nate. He was, you mentioned kind of experience. Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'll key off what you said, which is
Put all the words in my mouth.
his example was he was working in metals and manufacturing, and they used this amazingly advanced software to predict what their metal renderings will be, like aluminum casting. He works and creates Jeep door handles and things like that. Yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. Light fixtures and things. And so he was telling me this story where they had this just ultra expensive software that can create these rendering simulations,
right,
and predict whether or not that will actually work in the real world, so they don't have to waste tons of money and resources to actually test on that. And he said, generally speaking, broad strokes, the younger professionals caught onto the software pretty quickly. It was more intuitive to them than some of the more senior employees. So they were creating all these renderings, but once they brought in some of the more senior people, showed them, they're like, yeah, that's incredible, and we can never do that for X, Y, and Z reason. So there was a limit to what the rendering software said it could work, but they needed that experience to really share why that couldn't work, and then collaboratively they could create the best solution for it.
One of the first lessons we always taught in the Rocket Lab, if you give someone some CAD, the first thing they do is they put a square hole in something. And you're like, that's really interesting because drill bits are round. So I don't know how you expect to drill a square. At the corner of every square hole is a round, because that drill bit comes through. And it's that's the same thing.
Yeah,
you can make things in CAD that you cannot physically make. That's a single piece. How am I going to put a void in the middle? How are you going to do that, right?
Love it. with that, I think that's our time for today. Thanks for being on the show, Luke. Really,
so much for having me.
So,
Really
such
cool.
an engaging conversation. I guess we'll leave it with the thoughts of empathy and grace, because that's what helps us communicate better and think about others.
That wraps up another episode of Uncharted Your Sidekick for Life. A huge thanks to Luke for sharing his journey and shedding light on the unique challenges and opportunities that come with leading a new generation. We hope you found today's discussion insightful. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. If you would like to participate as a Gen Z guest or mentor, visit our site at foundingup.com or check out the show notes. And as always, keep pushing forward, stay curious, and don't be afraid to explore the uncharted.